I have made a lot of videos discussing pronouns, and yet somehow there is always more to discuss. It's one of those topics that just won't seem to die. And I wasn't even planning to make a video tonight. I'm kind of on a health kick these days, and I spent the last 3.5 hours straight on my treadmill. See, I have this treadmill under my standing desk now, which means I can work and exercise at the same time. But then I entered my evening ritual of reading the evening news, and this National Post piece caught my attention. So apparently, some doctor in Montreal was suspended for 3 months after getting into an argument with his transgender patient over pronouns and whether or not the patient was a man. The patient visited their doctor, whom they've been enrolled with for 4 years, and identified themselves as a trans male and asked for a prescription for testosterone. After some discussion about the appropriateness of this particular intervention, apparently they began to argue, with the doctor repeatedly referring to the individual as a female, woman, she, her, and whatever else. The article cites one particularly poetic quote that the doctor purportedly said: "A female patient until this day, you are a woman, dear madame." I only wish I could say that with a convincing French accent. Now, there are two things going on here. First, there is the question of whether a patient has the right to be referred to as he, him, and a man by their doctor. But there's a second part as well. The article discusses that the doctor suggested a colleague who was more experienced in hormone therapy but refused to make the referral for this individual. Let's talk about pronouns first, and let me clarify from the onset that everything I'm about to say below is about mature, consenting adults who wish to transition. The childhood transition discussion is a different can of worms entirely. I've been through a somewhat similar experience with my doctor, though it played out very differently in the end. My doctor found out about my gender dysphoria from the discharge paperwork from my stay in the psychiatric ward pre-transition. The circumstances that led to my stay in the ward will be another video, but while I was in the ward, I told my psychiatrist about the struggles I was having with gender, and she wrote that down in the discharge paperwork that my doctor received. 6 months later, I had come to the point that I was ready to move forward with my transition. I met with my doctor and told him where I was at. He told me that he didn't know much about transition, but he would investigate more to understand how best to care for my needs, and that he was prepared to work with other specialists as required to find the best path forward for me. And then he asked me something I wasn't expecting. What would you like me to call you, and what pronouns would support you best with where you're at? And I was caught off guard. I was still Jason, and it felt incredibly weird and uncomfortable to suddenly call me something different. Nothing had changed at all. I was wearing male clothes, and I hadn't even shaven my beard. And I can only imagine that it would have been a little bit weird for him to suddenly switch pronouns as well. I thought about it for a moment, and I told him I was fine with Jason and he, him, and he told me to just let him know if and when that ever changed. Now, those who have watched my other videos on pronouns will know that I am not a proponent of asking people for their preferred pronouns. I think it's frivolous and often attention-seeking and creates something messy that doesn't need to be. The whole concept of asking everyone you meet what pronouns they want is just nonsensical. Most communication is nonverbal anyways, and people's choice of presentation makes it pretty clear what they're going for. In my case, and in a clinical environment, it does kind of make sense to me, because remember, we are talking about a doctor-patient relationship and a patient with severe gender dysphoria. Perhaps my doctor thought that my dysphoria was frivolous or stupid. I don't know. But a doctor's duty is to care for their patients to achieve positive outcomes. And even if transition isn't or wasn't the best path for me to be taking, digging one's heels in that moment and insisting on calling me something I don't wish to be called is not likely to be psychologically helpful in helping me solve any issues, even if the issue is purely psychological in nature and needs therapeutic treatment over hormonal intervention. In a previous video on pronouns, I discussed how damaging it is for transgender people, or anyone really, to find their affirmation from other people. I discussed how the greatest improvements in my mental health throughout my entire transition came the moment I internalized that I didn't need affirmation from anyone at all. See, I don't need it from other people telling me I'm a woman or I get she, her pronouns, but I also don't even need affirmation from myself either. I've reached this point where I don't know what I am exactly, but I also don't really care. Today, if my doctor refused to use a particular pronoun with me, I don't think I'd think much of anything at all. I believe that that is a healthy relationship with pronouns, and I truly hope that the individual in this story is able to get to that place at some point in their life. But I can also say that I remember those days of being fragile and dependent on other people's affirmation. I wasn't at peace with my gender or my biological reality when I started transition. That was kind of the point in transitioning, and if my doctor had picked a pronoun fight with me, especially in the matter described in the article, I suspect that it would have hindered, not helped, me find my mental resiliency. And a doctor who's looking after patients' needs should know this. See, I do believe that the doctor has done a poor job of caring for the patient's psychological state, but I am not saying that the doctor should be forced to call someone a particular name or pronoun either. Ignoring the freedom argument that I've already explored in many other videos and focusing just on the clinical outcomes, forcing pronoun usage in all cases can and has led to subpar medical outcomes. Because what can't be overlooked is why the doctor refused to use the preferred pronouns of their patient. Was this a matter of the doctor sincerely believing that in this particular patient, at this particular moment, they needed a dose of cold, hard truth? Or was the doctor nailed to the floor on their personal beliefs of how society has begun to handle gender and decided not to entertain the possibility that the client needed some real support in gender matters? I'm not clear whether that's the analysis the medical review board undertook when analyzing this case, but that's the review I hope that they would have taken. I know a ton of psychotherapists who work with transgender individuals, and the best ones by far are the ones who recognize that they need to work alongside their patients to understand the complexity of their patient's mental state, to empathize with where their patients are in whatever struggles they're facing, and who vary their approach based on their client's needs. Don't we know this? That empathy goes a long way in building bridges, and after bridges are in place, cold hard medicine can more effectively be delivered because there's a relationship of trust. Recently, we have seen many people who believed that transitioning was the right path forward for them, but in fact needed some help to digest whether transition was actually the right path. Some people really have not thought this through, or have unrealistic expectations, or have other comorbidities fomenting their feelings. And then there are others who have moved forward with transition, are emotionally healthy and well-adjusted, and hold no regrets at all. It's complex, and good clinicians recognize the complexity. They yearn to know more, and they know their limits when maybe someone else should take over. We need to let clinicians face the complexity of their job. They need to approach their work with empathy and compassion, and patients need to trust that the medical professionals working with them are looking out for their best interests. All of those need to happen for healthcare to work, and in transgender matters we have failures in all three of those domains. But for myself, that is exactly the relationship that I've built with my doctor, and my entire transitional experience has been absolutely fantastic.